They're saying it to keep the energy up, and it's exciting.
No, you're the energy. You don't have to keep it up. You're the energy. You come out with the X-ray.
Don Rickles was more than a comedian. The legendary Merchant of Venom made a career out of turning insults into an art form, leaving Hollywood both howling with laughter and nervously shifting in their seats. But behind the playful jabs was a man who carried real grudges. Among the many names he mocked on stage, there was one man he truly despised more than anyone else. But why did Rickles keep this secret so long till his final years? Join us as we uncover the very man Rickles hated the most. The rise of Don Rickles. Don Rickles rose to fame in the shining glow of Las Vegas during the 1950s and 1960s, when America discovered a new kind of entertainment capital. The desert city had transformed into a wonderland of flashing neon lights, buzzing casinos, and endless shows. Every night, the streets were alive with music, laughter, and the sound of money being won and lost. Performers from all over the country rushed to the Strip, eager to share the stage with the biggest names of the era. At a time when most comedians played it safe with funny stories, gentle jokes, or clever punchlines, Rickles brought something no one had ever seen before. He entered the stage like a fighter entering an arena, ready to strike with words instead of fists. His style was fearless, bold, and dangerous. Comedy, for him, wasn't about making people feel comfortable. It was about exposing truths, tearing down masks, and doing it with such sharp sarcasm that the words seemed to slice through the air. While others joked about situations, Rickles joked about people. He targeted appearances, personalities, careers, even race and habits. To him, nothing was untouchable, and no subject was off-limits. At first, audiences were shocked. Gasps would echo through the room as people struggled to believe what they were hearing. But those gasps quickly turned into roars of laughter. Once the shock wore off, they realized they were witnessing something entirely new, comedy that wasn't polite but brutally honest. And Rickles didn't stop at ordinary people. He often aimed his sharp tongue at celebrities, especially those sitting in the front rows of his shows. In doing so, he made his audiences feel as if they were in on a secret rebellion, laughing at the powerful and the famous without fear. Ironically, the public gave him the nickname Mr. Warmth. At first glance, the title sounded friendly and affectionate. But anyone who had seen Rickles perform knew it was meant as pure irony. He was not warm and fuzzy on stage. He was a storm, a whirlwind of biting remarks. His humor could sting like a dagger, leaving people reeling. Yet, there was something magical about the way he did it. Even the people he insulted most seemed to laugh along with him. Actors, singers, politicians, and Hollywood legends often left his shows chuckling at their own expense. The secret to his success was balance. Rickles somehow managed to walk the fine line between cruelty and charm. He could deliver an insult so sharp that it might have sounded hateful from anyone else, but when he said it, it became funny. Instead of feeling humiliated, his targets often felt included, as though they were part of a shared joke rather than victims of it. This unusual gift allowed him to thrive in a world where most comedians would have been silenced for crossing the line. Over the decades, Rickles became a constant presence in American entertainment. He appeared on countless talk shows, most famously The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. On those late-night stages, his unfiltered roasts turned television into a playground of sarcasm. He had no fear of power or status. Presidents, movie stars, fellow comedians, and even his closest friends became subjects of his quick tongue. His comedy was like a fire that spared no one. Rickles lived a long life, passing away in 2017 at the age of 90. By then, he had left behind a legacy unlike any other comedian in history. But beneath the endless applause and laughter, there was a darker truth. Not every target of his humor was just a casual joke. Some people he roasted carried a deeper meaning for him. Late in life, Rickles admitted to keeping a blacklist, a mental list of people he genuinely disliked or even despised. These were not just random celebrities. To Rickles, they represented the false charm, inflated egos, or hollow values of Hollywood that he had always hated. For decades, audiences thought his jokes were just part of the act. But in reality, some of them carried real bitterness. Among those he named were giants of entertainment: Clint Eastwood, Dean Martin, Ronald Reagan, Frank Sinatra, Bob Hope, Johnny Carson, Joan Rivers, and Jerry Lewis. To the public, these were icons. To Rickles, they were also symbols of the industry's flaws, people he could not forgive. Who was the one person he appeared to dislike above all others? Let's find out. Clint Eastwood. When it came to roasting Hollywood's biggest names, Don Rickles never ran out of targets. But there was one man he seemed to dislike more than most: Clint Eastwood. Unlike the politicians, fellow comics, or entertainers Rickles usually attacked, Eastwood was different. He was a movie star, a household name, and an American icon. Millions adored him. But to Rickles, he was nothing more than a stiff figure on a poster, a man who had built his career on nothing but a trademark scowl. Rickles once delivered a line that cut like a blade. "Clint, you've got two expressions. One is a scowl, the other is a deeper scowl. And that's how you became a Hollywood legend." The audience erupted with laughter. Eastwood, true to his quiet, stoic reputation, only smirked. Most people saw the exchange as light-hearted banter, but Rickles didn't see it that way. To him, that cold little smile was proof that Eastwood lacked the fire and depth of a true actor. Rickles was convinced Eastwood's fame was hollow, built not on talent, but on silence and a mean stare. Time and again, Rickles returned to Eastwood as a punching bag. He once joked, if Clint had been born with a big, bright smile like Sinatra, he'd probably be working at a carnival selling tickets instead of sitting in the director's chair. On another occasion, he sneered, "Clint's only real talent is staring at people until they get bored and leave." For Rickles, Eastwood's success was not just annoying, it was unfair. Hollywood, in his eyes, had pushed aside real talent in favor of a cowboy who had one look and one trick. To Rickles, Eastwood wasn't the face of great American cinema, but a symbol of how looks and attitude could sometimes win over skill and artistry. The strange part was that Eastwood never fought back. He didn't trade insults, didn't snap, didn't even defend himself. He simply sat there with his famous icy calm, almost daring Rickles to keep going. And Rickles did. The lack of reaction only made him more determined. At one point, he cracked, "Clint, if you get any colder, people will start storing frozen food in you." This odd push and pull created a strange relationship between the two men. Whenever Rickles was on stage, Eastwood knew his name would come up. And every time Eastwood stayed quiet, Rickles found a fresh way to dig deeper. To the crowds, it was just comedy, an insult comic taking playful shots at a stoic movie star. But behind the laughter was something sharper, a feud built on Rickles' firm belief that Clint Eastwood had been unfairly lifted onto a pedestal he didn't deserve. Yet, as much as Rickles disliked Eastwood, there was another man who represented something far worse in his eyes. Clint, at least, was just a silent cowboy propped up by Hollywood. But the other man was different. A star whose smooth charm and magnetic presence, Rickles believed, were nothing more than a mask hiding something darker. So, who was that man? Let's find out. Dean Martin. Dean Martin was the picture of effortless charm, the kind of entertainer who seemed to float through life with a smile, a drink in hand, and a voice that could soothe and seduce in equal measure. To millions of fans around the world, he was more than a singer. He was an icon of cool, a living embodiment of the glamour and glitz of Las Vegas in its heyday. Every wink, every laid-back phrase, every note sung with that smooth, velvety tone only added to his legendary status. Martin wasn't just a member of the Rat Pack. He was its heart, its soul, its ultimate symbol of effortless style. But to Don Rickles, the man behind the quick insults and relentless stage attacks, Dean Martin was far from a legend. In fact, he was the very definition of a fraud. Rickles didn't see the relaxed, charming entertainer that the public adored. He saw a performer who leaned too heavily on his natural charisma, on the illusion of cool, and, most importantly, on the steady flow of whiskey. To Rickles, Martin's fame was not earned through hard work, precision, or creativity. It was borrowed from charm and habit, a kind of lazy magic trick performed on an adoring audience. On stage, Rickles did not attempt to hide his feelings. In front of the bright lights and roaring crowds of Las Vegas, he attacked Martin with the precision of a master surgeon and the humor of a stand-up genius. "Dean, you don't sing, you just yawn with a melody," he would declare, punctuating his words with a sharp glare and a smirk. The audience would erupt, laughter spilling across the room, but beneath the applause was Rickles's genuine contempt. "You succeeded by drinking more than you sang," he would add. "If Las Vegas ever runs out of whiskey, your career is over." The words were funny, yes, but they were also a direct hit at the heart of what Rickles despised, a performer who relied on appearances, charm, and alcohol rather than real skill or dedication. What made Rickles angriest of all was the way the world celebrated Martin. While Rickles had clawed, scraped, and hustled his way to recognition, Martin seemed to float into fame, worshipped by fans and idolized by the entertainment industry for traits Rickles found hollow. Here was a man who didn't rehearse like Frank Sinatra, didn't challenge audiences, or himself, like other performers, didn't push boundaries in any meaningful way. Yet he was adored, as if he had reinvented entertainment itself. To Rickles, this wasn't admiration. It was injustice. Rickles didn't spare Martin even in moments of playful ridicule. On stage, he would jab at the singer's persona with razor-sharp lines. "Dean, you're so drunk that if the audience claps for another minute, you'll think you're in a bar and order another drink." The crowd laughed, but Rickles's message was unmistakable. Behind the grin and the wine-soaked charm was a man who had built a career on illusions, not talent. Even as the years passed and both men aged into legends in their own right, Rickles never softened toward Martin. In interviews later in life, he would name him among the few people who genuinely irritated him, recalling with unmistakable disdain the performer he believed was overrated. To Rickles, Dean Martin represented a kind of false success, a symbol of what the world often celebrates instead of what it should: hard work, originality, and grit. Martin was the charming idler. He was the relaxed superstar who made it seem effortless, and to Rickles, that was unforgivable. And Martin wasn't the only figure who earned Rickles's scorn. Just as he had loathed the lazy charm of Dean Martin, Rickles extended his criticism to another man who reached towering heights by hiding behind a smile and public approval. But in the case of Martin, The hatred was intensely personal, a lifelong grudge against a fellow performer who, in Rickles' eyes, had become rich and famous, not through talent or perseverance, but through charisma, charm, and a carefully cultivated image of effortless cool. And Dean Martin, for all the admiration he received, would never meet that standard in Rickles' eyes. Does Don Rickles despise His Excellency as well Ronald Reagan? Let's take a closer look. Ronald Reagan. Before Ronald Reagan became the 40th President of the United States in 1981, he lived a very different life. As a Hollywood actor struggling to find his place in Tinseltown. Back then, he wasn't the polished political icon the world would later know. He was a man of middling talent, charming looks, and ambition, trying to survive in a town obsessed with perfection. To Don Rickles, the sharp-tongued king of insult comedy, Reagan was the perfect target, a symbol of everything Rickles despised about show business. He saw a man who had no real acting skill, a stiff and wooden performer whose career relied more on appearances than on any genuine talent. Rickles never held back. He had a way of slicing through facades with words as sharp as knives, and Reagan quickly became one of his favorite victims. At a comedy show, Rickles once snapped, "Ronnie, you were so bad in the movies that Hollywood had to push you into politics." The audience roared with laughter, while Reagan's smile stiffened. Privately, he admitted to friends that Rickles sometimes crossed the line, that his humor, though funny to the masses, stung more than most could endure. Their interactions were a dance of polite coldness and verbal jabs, a constant tension simmering beneath the surface. When Reagan transitioned from Hollywood to the political stage, Rickles did not soften. In fact, he doubled down, taking every opportunity to remind the nation of Reagan's cinematic past. On national television, he cracked, "Mr. President, I still remember you from those awful films. It's a miracle America chose a character actor to lead the world." The joke sent audiences into hysterics, yet behind the humor lay Rickles' true sentiment: disbelief and disdain. To him, Reagan represented a larger truth, that in Hollywood, image could outweigh talent, and a mediocre actor could be elevated to icon status if packaged correctly. Rickles' mockery wasn't limited to words alone. It carried a sting. "Even the dog Lassie had more memorable roles than you," he quipped, drawing laughter while making it painfully clear where he thought Reagan's abilities ranked. Ironically, Reagan often laughed along in public, treating the insults as part of the act, showing the world he had a sense of humor. But for Rickles, it was no act. His criticism came from genuine contempt. He once referred to Reagan as the disgrace of Hollywood, and described the journey from mediocre actor to world leader as the funniest play of the 20th century. To Rickles, Reagan embodied the surreal spectacle of fame and politics colliding, a cautionary tale of how appearances could deceive and charm could override substance. Yet, if Reagan represented the absurdity of fake success turned political power, another figure on Rickles' radar was even more complicated, blurring the line between talent, fame, and shadows darker than mere Hollywood ambition. That man was Frank Sinatra, a legend whose charisma and artistry commanded awe, but whose private dealings and larger-than-life persona drew Rickles' critical eye in equal measure. Where Reagan symbolized the improbable elevation of mediocrity, Sinatra embodied a different type of power, a mix of brilliance, danger, and magnetism that made Rickles both admire and fear the man at the same time. So, who made Rickles' final blacklist? Let's find out. Rickles' last confession. Frank Sinatra was one of the few people in Don Rickles' life who was both a friend and a constant target. On the surface, their relationship seemed warm and supportive. Sinatra had a hand in lifting Rickles's career, introducing him to the right people in Las Vegas, inviting him to dazzling dinners, and offering his endorsement in a world where connections mattered as much as talent. Yet, beneath this polished friendship, Rickles never missed an opportunity to poke fun at the legendary singer. "Frank, without the mafia, you'd just be a second-rate lounge singer," he would jab, with a grin that dared anyone to object. Las Vegas in the 1960s was a city run as much by mob influence as by neon lights and glitzy shows. Sinatra's rumored ties to organized crime were whispered about in every casino corridor. Yet Rickles, fearless as ever, mocked him publicly. Audiences often gasped, half expecting Sinatra's men to intervene. But Sinatra never reacted with anger. Instead, he laughed, clapped, and sometimes even egged Rickles on, leaving everyone to wonder whether he truly forgave the insults or simply hid his irritation behind a charming smile. Rickles, for his part, admired Sinatra's voice deeply. Few could match that smooth, magnetic sound. But what he could not respect was the machinery behind Sinatra's empire. To Rickles, Frank's fame and fortune were less about musical genius and more about fear, influence, and strategic connections. Sinatra had mastered the art of leverage, and Rickles saw it all with a mixture of awe and disgust. This paradox, admiring talent while despising power, was not unique to Sinatra. Rickles's blacklist of entertainment icons was extensive. Bob Hope, for example, represented everything Rickles loathed about comedy: safe, polished, and artificial. "Bob Hope is the Disneyland of comedy," he sneered. "It's shiny and beautiful, but it has no truth." To Rickles, Hope's charm was hollow, his jokes carefully sanitized, and his fame built on appealing to the widest audience rather than expressing any real comedic bite. Even Johnny Carson, a longtime friend and a frequent host for Rickles's appearances, was not immune. Rickles dismissed Carson as dull and overly dependent on scripts. "Johnny, you're not a comedian. You're just a host with the longest seat in television history," he quipped. There was no malice in the statement, only Rickles's relentless commitment to his personal brand of honesty. Joan Rivers and Jerry Lewis were also on his radar. Rivers, he felt, mimicked insult comedy without grace or originality. Lewis, adored in France and lauded for his slapstick, struck Rickles as a performer rewarded more for spectacle than substance. To him, they were emblematic of an industry that celebrated the wrong kinds of talent, rewarding style over substance, popularity over skill. For decades, Rickles wrapped his critiques in humor, hiding bitterness behind laughter. But as he aged, he confessed the truth of his private blacklist. It was more than a list of grudges. It was his judgment of a world he believed was shallow, insincere, and unjust. Yet, even with all the sharp edges of his public persona, Rickles's personal life was a study in contrast. Offstage, he was gentle, devoted to his wife and children, and remarkably scandal-free. So, what do you think about Rickles's hatred for these men? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe.